Mold making and casting are central techniques in the history of art and design, but their uses and applications are long-standing and varied, and also play a vast role in today's arenas of artistic production and industrial manufacturing. In the world of art, the techniques of mold making and casting have served as tools by sculptors and other artists in both studies that lead to the final form of an artwork or as a means of reproducing an artwork. And increasingly, contemporary artists see them as a work of art in and of themselves. But these processes also play leading roles outside of fine art and support areas as varied as scientific research and mass manufacture in the automotive industries. And if you don't know, many of the decorative and everyday objects you yourselves use have been made through various mold making processes. Let us now dig deeper into what is mold and casting. Basically, a mold is a block that contains a hollow cavity in a desired shape. On the other hand, casting is the process of shaping liquid or a pliable material. This might be plastic, glass, metal, clay, epoxy, concrete, plaster, or many other options that is poured into the mold. After which, the liquid hardens or sets inside the mold, adopting its shape. What you end up with is a solidified object, also known as the casting. Moving forward, let us now discuss the history of molding and casting. First up is during the prehistoric times. Mold making is a 6,000-year-old skill. That means that our prehistoric ancestors were working in the same technique that we can pass on to our children and grandchildren. The oldest surviving casting is the copper frog from 3200 BC Mesopotamia. The discovery of melted copper is thought to have followed by gold and silver, which were probably found in their natural form and hammered into desired shapes. By the time prehistoric people came across copper, they already had knowledge on pottery making. This means that they could then combine two processes and shape the liquid metal through clay, sand, or stone molds. These early discoveries and connections enabled us to perform highly technical and complex mold making and casting processes at present. Archaeologists have also unearthed stone molds used for making axes from about 3000 BC. They were probably made from identical two-piece mold tied together with a rope, with a hole on top through which the liquid metal would have been poured. Many early weapons were fabricated through casting, making this technique key to the success of hunting and gathering lifestyle of early humans. This shows the effect that fabrication techniques have on all aspects of life. Next up is Egyptomania. In the 3rd millennium BC, casting methods were advanced by Egyptians who notably plastered the heads of mummies for portraits of the deceased. The rich art and material culture of the Egyptian civilization was centered around their spiritual beliefs. In particular, they believed in rebirth after death. According to them, death was simply a momentary phase between life and the afterlife. Eternal life could be ensured through things such as mummification and the offering of subjects. As a result, Egyptian funerary practices and rituals involve a wide range of production in an assortment of materials, from jewelry and objects for the home, to painting and statuary. The process of casting would of course have been central to all of this. At this time, a range of casting techniques was being developed in both the Near and Far East before making their way to Europe. We now move on to ancient Greek and Roman. Since Greek and Roman antiquity, plaster has been a fundamental medium in the long-standing history of replicating artworks, especially marble and bronze sculptures in the round and sculptural reliefs. The earliest large-scale Greek bronze sculptures were simple in form and shape from a hammer, separate parts of which were sometimes attached with rivets. From there, artists move on to the technique of hollow lost wax casting in order to make large freestanding bronzes. Greek statues were highly prized during the Roman rule. Roman artists created marble and bronze copies of them by making plaster casts that could be shipped to workshops throughout the empire. In addition to the domestic settings of the wealthy, these works were used to fill niches to decorate a range of public spaces such as theaters and public baths. In fact, these Roman copies are of vital importance to understanding history today because a large number of Greek statues were melted down. Roman marble and bronze copies are the only surviving evidence of them. Let us now proceed to the mold making during the Renaissance. The artists and humanists, or those who study the humanities and privileged classical antiquity of Renaissance Europe of the 14th and 15th centuries, were fascinated by the culture of their ancient predecessors, while, according to them, the arts and humanities had declined during the Middle Ages. They were at their high points at the time of Greek and Roman antiquity. This extended from the literature to the arts, whose drawings and sculptures offered perfect perspective, proportions, and beauty ideals. As art schools began to teach these ancient techniques of anatomy and perspective, they made and drew on plaster casts from the work of the ancients. The most common type of plaster mainly contains either gypsum, lime, or cement. Molds were notably made of wood, terracotta, and plaster, as opposed to today's silicone rubber. Like today, the work that went into making the mold itself was probably the most painstaking stage, whereas the actual casting process was relatively simple. The mold would have been filled with plaster powder dissolved in water, which was removed after hardening. Plaster is cheap and sets quickly, making it ideal for rapid reproductions. These casts filled the private collections of scholars, artists, aristocrats, and royals. Italy was central to the Renaissance, with Florence as a particular thriving city. This is where the iconic sculptor Donatello lived and worked. In 1430, he completed his masterpiece in bronze David, known to be the first freestanding bronze statue in Western art. This and other works would have been supported by the new era foundry development in the 15th century. Next up is the 19th century. Casts played an important role in the applied arts during the age of industrialization, as more and more objects could be produced in a range of styles thanks to the new industrialized technologies. Design reformers feared a deterioration of public taste. As such, the Victoria and Albert Museum in London joined other institutions who sought to educate the public on matters of taste. The institutions such as the Paris École des Beaux-Arts, the Pennsylvania Academy of the Fine Arts, and Museum of Fine Arts in Boston had their encyclopedic view of art history, used plaster castings to fill gaps in their collections of European masters. Like his predecessor, the French animalier or sculptor of animals Antoine-Louis Barye, the renowned French sculptor Auguste Rodin was one of the artists who responded to the large demand for public and domestic sculpture in the 19th century. He was able to disseminate his work to a large audience through large-scale bronze castings of his work, which he made in his atelier with a team of plaster casters, carvers, and founders. Although he preferred the lost wax casting method, he often used the hollow sand casting technique. With this technique, the desired shape is pressed into sand to leave a negative imprint. A slightly smaller version is placed within the negative imprint and secured with pins, allowing space for molten bronze. Rodin's plaster castings also serve as studies for his carved sculpture and bronze statues. From his preliminary sketches, he would make a clay model to then fashion into a plaster casting. Often, he would make several castings of one piece with which to experiment. Next is mold making and casting in the post-war era. The momentum in the 20th century in terms of industrial design production was heightened during the Second World War in the United States. In order to support the war industry,
Following the war, these efforts were reinvested in the plastics and injection molding industry to answer the large demand for inexpensive, mass-produced objects. Injection molding is used to create many things, from structural, mechanical, and automotive parts to packaging, musical instruments, toys, and one-piece furniture items. It is the ideal process for producing high volumes of the same object. Essentially, this consists in a screw-type plunger forcing molten plastic into a mold, which solidifies in its new shape. It is most commonly used for working with thermoplastic and thermosetting polymers. Mold-O-Rama, used predominantly from the 1950s. Teichmüller Mold-O-Rama machine brought injection molding in the homes of many. Machines were located at countless shops and tourist attractions, so people could observe the process from start to finish and come away with an inexpensive plastic figurine, from zoo animals to steam trains. Through this process, a pipe shoots liquid hot polyethylene into a mold, while a second pipe blows steam inside the mold, leaving it hollow inside. Life casting. Life casting is the process of creating a three-dimensional copy of a living human body. This has especially proven useful for art production, the special effects industry for making props and animatronics, and towards the creation of medical prosthetics and dentures. One of the oldest dental techniques has drawn on casting to make gold or porcelain duplicates of teeth for a variety of purposes such as dentures or crowns. Dentists typically make wax models of the objects to cast and burn the wax in an oven, leaving a hole in the desired shape, which is then filled with liquid metal. Today, or at present, the techniques of mold making and casting are still employed to make the majority of the things we use, from the structural components that support the spaces in which we reside to the household goods we purchase daily. As over the course of early 20th century modernism, plaster casts became to be seen as outdated relics of an older art system. Many museums destroyed the accession and hid them from public view. In more recent years, institutions have reassessed these archival holdings, starting to revalue these pieces for the historical and documentary information they provide. In our current postmodern age, artists have also begun to rethink their aesthetic value and meaning, embracing and exploring the notions of reproduction and authorship, for instance. Sean Hunter Williams is one such artist who currently uses mold making as a main feature of his art practice. And although perhaps less prevalent than in the 19th century, bronze and other metal casting still figures widely in current art production.